Puzzled, I quickly searched the room, but after being unable to find him, I figured my older sister had whisked the poor cat away to her room. No big deal, I thought. I finished preparing and was ready to head out, but just as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a soft hiss coming from my room. I marched back in, now convinced Brunch was just hiding somewhere out of sight. Peering under the bed, I discovered Brunch, huddled at the far end of the bed behind the assortment of shoeboxes. His fur was stood on end. I had never seen him behave like this before. After calling out to him for a few minutes, trying to gently coax him out to no avail, I worried that something was terribly wrong with Brunch. I made an awkward attempt to crawl under the bed and try pulling him out. While I was not particularly fond of cats, Brunch had always been a quiet and gentle companion to me since my childhood. He had never scratched me or anyone else for that matter. Yet for the first time, as I reached out to him, he let out a deep guttural hiss and slashed my arm, leaving a deep gash. Shocked, I retreated from under the bed. I was bleeding a lot more than I would have expected, with a mix of frustration from the sudden violence and panic at the sight of blood all over my arm and clothes. I realised I probably wasn't going to make it to work on time. I hurriedly messaged my boss, letting them know I would be late, before tending my wound, cleaning myself up and getting changed. Brunch was still hiding under the bed, and just as I was about to try coaxing him out again, I heard a knock on the front door. What the hell, who knocks on people's doors at 2 in the morning? I muttered to myself, perplexed and slightly unnerved. I stepped into the hallway, moving cautiously towards the door. Through the frosted window, I could see a somewhat familiar figure standing there, eerily motionless. My heart pounded as I slowly approached. That's when I heard a voice. "Hey, it's me, let me in." The voice in the dead of night sent shivers down my spine, but the most chilling part was the familiarity of the voice itself. It was my voice. The figure on the other side of the door was unmistakably me. "Hey, it's me, let me in," it repeated firmly, now knocking more insistently. Fear set in as I realised that any of my family members would have fallen for this. I was supposed to have left for work by now. Trembling, I began to back away from the door. The figure inched closer, attempting to peer through the frosted window. As it did, I could begin to discern the blurry details on its face. Our eyes locked, and for a brief moment it seemed surprised, but then it smiled. The most sinister, unnerving smile, a smile that I would never make. In that bone-chilling moment, it silently backed away from the door and vanished into the night. Needless to say, I never made it to work that night, or any night since. My family thinks I'm crazy for locking myself away in my room, telling me it was just some sort of prank. But since that day, every sleepless night I've had listening to my cat hiss from under the bed convinces me otherwise. The second story is called "My Family Made a Deal to Give One Child to the Faceless Man every 50 years. I remember the first time I saw the man, the thing with the face like melting wax. I knew he had many masks and many names. He had followed our family for years, and from father to son, mother to daughter, the fear and terror of the Faceless Man got passed down. Every time he came, he would have a different face. The first time I saw him, he looked like a withered old Asian man, leaning heavily on a wooden cane with a silver top. Our front door stood wide open, and I saw my mother and father standing there, their faces as pale as ghosts as they looked down upon the stranger. I couldn't have been older than 11 years old, but the memory is still as sharp as a butcher's knife stuck in my brain. I walked forwards from the living room, the cartoon noises still blaring loudly in the background. The man looked past them and straight at me. He squinted his eyes and grinned. "Another lamb, so pretty and young," he mused. "Isn't it a shame when a child is taken so early in life? And yet God kills children every day. I heard last month a hurricane blew an entire school down and killed 100 of the little bastards in one swift go. So perhaps God will forgive me for my small sins, my taking of a few here and there to keep my appetite satiated." "Get out of here," my father snarled through gritted teeth. He clenched his fists until the knuckles turned white, looking as if he would strike out at any moment. "Do you know who I am?" the Faceless Man asked in a whispery voice. Then he began chuckling. It sounded like someone trying to laugh with a slit throat, a harsh gurgling sound that raised goosebumps all up and down my body. My father slammed the door shut quickly, locking the deadbolts. I fingered the silver cross my mother had given me nervously. I always did when I was anxious. Feeling it laying there cold against my skin helped bring me back to the moment. My father turned to look at us with panic-stricken eyes. I heard light knocking on the door behind him as the demonic laughter continued to grow sobbing as she went. Sunlight from the warm summer sky continued to stream in through the windows. What a beautiful day, I thought to myself. Such a beautiful day, and maybe my last. Then I saw a shadow cross in front of the living room window. I saw someone peeking in with wide, excited eyes. A grin like a skull spread across his leathered old face. As I watched, the face began to drip and contort as it continued to smile. It started slowly around the lips and eyes, and then it began speeding up. Within seconds, I saw the flesh running down his cheeks and chin in rivulets, dripping like flesh-coloured wax. Behind the mask he wore, I got a glimpse of something horrible, before new streams of flesh rolled over it from his scalp and forehead. Then the last of the human skin dripped off, and I found myself staring into the face of hell. I could never explain the true horror of the thing lurking behind its costume of human skin. It felt like staring into a pus-filled wound, with maggots writhing around the edges, or maybe like falling into a mass grave. Some of its body seemed flipped inside out, with the glistening muscles on the outside, but the bloody demonic face was far more disturbing. It had eyes like two smouldering cigarette burns. Its mouth was a slashed, disgusting thing. The lips looked eaten away, with ragged patches of flesh surrounding them that seemed to make the smile seem much larger, reminding me of how a clown would do its makeup. I saw that grinning mouth filled with countless needle, sharp teeth, above black, sore-ridden gums that writhed and shivered in its lipless mouth. Even through the window, a smell like sulphur and reeking spoiled meat filtered into the house, seeming to fill the air like a physical presence. Its body looked flipped inside out. I could see the quivering muscles on the skinless figure. It looked deathly thin, and veins ran along the outside of its face and body like thick, dark worms, pulsating with each beat of the satanic heart that lay inside that thing's chest, emanating sickness and evil through every pore of its gleaming body. As it stared into my soul with its black, lidless eyes, I saw in that face all the worst nightmares of the universe. I saw mountains of corpses festering under a hot sun, black holes eating worlds as masses screamed. I saw mothers drowning their kids in bathtubs, and animals eating each other alive. I saw into eternity, and it looked so dark and empty that I fell to my knees, pleading. Make it stop, I cried, tears streaming down my face. My father ran in with his shotgun raised, but when I looked back up, the window was empty. Yet the visions continued to run through my mind like a movie, atrocity after atrocity, and somehow it all connected back to the Faceless Man. After a few seconds of utter silence, that deep gurgling voice rang out, making us all jump. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, reverberating throughout the room. It said something that made my father waver on his feet, a strange verse, but one I remember by heart to this day. Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant, and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man. After that we barricaded the doors and locked all the windows. I knew it wouldn't keep the Faceless Man out. He could easily just smash through a window, and perhaps he wouldn't even need to do that. Maybe he could pass inside the house any time he wanted, and yet, if so, why hadn't he? So it started again, my mother said, looking at my father with a powerful intensity in her eyes. He's come back again for a sacrifice. My father nodded slowly. What do you mean, a sacrifice? I asked, my child's mind not comprehending the magnitude of the situation yet. My father hesitated. He eats the souls of people, my father said. He and my great-grandfather drew up a contract a long, long time ago, and ever since our family has had great wealth. You're young, so you don't really understand fully yet, but not everyone lives in mansions like us. Not everyone vacations in Paris and Buenos Aires during summer vacation. Not everyone has a garage full of Porsches and Mercedes. So why don't you just tell him no? I asked in my childish way. We don't need all this money. The left side of my father's face began twitching. He stomped towards me, shouting as tears ran down his face. I don't give a shit about money, he cried. The deal was drawn in blood and cursed from that first day. Do you think if I could get him to go away by giving him everything I own, I wouldn't? I would do it in a heartbeat. I would live in a goddamn trailer and eat instant noodles if I had to, but there is no escape. He looked around as if expecting to see the Faceless Man standing right behind him. He began looking out of the windows, seeing nothing but a bright summer's day. We need to go, my mother whispered. Now, let's just take Susan and go. He won't us if we keep moving. He'll find us, my father said, looking defeated. Tears continued to stream down his face. He looked like a defeated man. He always does, but fuck it, let's go. We'll take the bastard on a run around the world. We took off from the property and my father told me more about the deal as we flew out of town in an expensive Mercedes, redlining the accelerator. I thought more than once he would crash and kill us all in his frenzy to put distance between us and the Faceless Man. Once every 50 years, my father said. He comes. He has his pick of the litter, as he calls it. He takes one child from our family, and in exchange our wealth is guaranteed for the next 50 years. Even during the Great Depression, our family didn't suffer, except of course the periodic abductions of children. He makes the parents watch as he takes the soul of the child into himself. I don't know what kind of foul magic it involves, but from what I've read in the diaries of my grandfather, it's a very painful ritual that involves skinning the child alive and rubbing their body with special herbs. Then he makes them walk, totally skinned and bleeding to death until they collapse, and that's when he takes the soul. He sucks it out of their eyes. It looks like thin wisps of light when it finally goes. I shook inwardly in horror. No one would ever allow that to happen to their kid, I said confidently. My father shook his head. You act as if we have a choice, he said. The first time he comes politely, knocks on the door and tells the parents it's time to fulfill the contract. If they say no, then he leaves. But he always comes back, and the next time he won't be polite, and he won't leave. He'll come into the house when we're sleeping, torture me and your mother to death, slit our throats and then take you anyway. He's tireless, he doesn't age, he doesn't sleep, and as far as I know, he can't die. How can we fight against such an evil? By going to the moon? But why would great-grandpa make a deal like that anyway, I asked. Because at the time he had 10 children and all of them were starving. A few had dysentery and he didn't have a penny to his name at the time. He chose to sacrifice one and give it to the Faceless Man to save the other 9. My father shrugged. I don't know if we can understand it. I certainly don't agree with it. I'm not sure he realised at the time that our family would suffer eternally afterwards, and that the contract could not be voided except through death. He laughed bitterly. We should have just let our family line die out maybe. That would have solved the problem. What about the words at the end, Daddy? I asked. What do those mean? Oh, that's just an old famous poem. My grandfather used to recite it to me before he shot himself. He loved T.S. Eliot and he thought that poem had some relevance to our problems for some reason. He never got over the loss of his son to the Faceless Man, you see. Never. He used to wake up screaming in the night. He tried to drink his memories away, but in the end... My father braked suddenly, bringing the car to a full stop. I looked up, seeing forests on both sides of us. We hadn't travelled long. A hitchhiker stood at the edge of the road in grimy blue jeans and a bright tie-dye shirt. His long hair rippled around him as he stood with his thumb out. But his face had started to drip and melt. We all saw it and froze. My father reached down below his seat and pulled out the black shotgun. He ran out the car like a madman, his eyes blazing with anger and terror. Get out of here, he cried, as if to a rabid animal. Then he raised the gun and fired. The Faceless Man's tie-dye shirt burst into shreds as buckshot tore into it. The Faceless Man smiled, raised his hand to us in a wave, and disappeared. The clothes fell limply to the grass below, now totally empty. My father shook his head grimly and turned around to come back to the car. A dark shape zoomed out of the forest, holding a sharp knife. Before my father could turn, he raised it to his throat and pulled. My mother screamed, getting out of the car to go help my father, but he was dead. Even as a child, I knew it. I could see the knife had practically severed his head from his body, except for the spine and a thin bit of flesh on the back. Blood poured out, flooding down his chest as he stood there for a moment, uncomprehending. Then he began to fall forwards, and his head snapped back, revealing the gore, muscles and ligaments beneath. I watched as my mother ran to his side, panic-stricken. The Faceless Man looked on with glee, laughing and shrieking. His black eyes blazed with an inner light as he looked towards me and grinned, showing the 100 needle-sharp teeth behind that separating saw of a mouth. My mother looked up at him, trying to grab the gun from my father's stiff hands, but the Faceless Man didn't even flinch. He ran forwards, his sleek bloody body as fast as a greyhound's. He opened his mouth wide and bit at my mother's face. I saw the teeth bite into her skin, and he began to shake his head like a dog, ripping and shredding. Her face became a mask of gore, and I screamed in the car, nearly throwing up. But something inside told me I needed to move. I wasn't a stupid kid after all. I wasn't going to die here next to some woods in the middle of nowhere. of cash with him in the centre console, and I counted it with awe. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. I went on the run soon after, moving across the country and living on the money I found. It was 4 years later when I went to a carnival, bored, and decided to have my future read. I hadn't seen the Faceless Man in years, and I figured I'd lost him, if only that were true. The old woman pulled out her tarot card deck and began flipping them over one by one. "Ah," she said in a voice that seemed to deepen. "I see. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel, and here's the one-eyed merchant." I screamed, backing up quickly as the flesh began to drip off her face. "And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see." The last of the skin dripped off. The grinning thing beneath rose from the chair, its sleek bloody body and black holes of eyes regarding me with glee. "Ah yes, I am forbidden to see, but I have seen it. I've seen it, and look what it's done to me, Susan. Look at what it's done. Your mother and father rot in a shallow grave somewhere, picked clean by animals, and now it's just you and me, Susan, and we're alone. The card is blank, but it doesn't have to be. Come and see what it holds." He rose into the air, his bloody skeletal feet dangling feet above the ground. "Come and see." I pulled the pistol I always carried out of its holster and began firing at point-blank range into the demonic face and black heart of that thing. People began to scream all around me at the carnival. I turned to run out of the tent, but a cold hand gripped my shoulder. "Leaving so soon?" the soft voice whispered in my ear, laughing with a sound a drowning man might make. "Ah, but we haven't finished, Susan. Worthy is the lamb, worthy is the lamb, worthy is the—" Suddenly the hand touched the silver cross my mother had given me as a small girl, and it flinched away. I felt the grip loosen, and I ran without looking back. People had taken cover all over the carnival. Many had started to leave, and I saw agitated police and security trying to find out where the gunshots had come from. I immediately mixed into a large crowd and made my way towards the exit, but I constantly looked back, expecting to see a man with a melting face. Perhaps he would act like a police officer and pretend to arrest me before bringing me to some dark forest and starting the skinning process. I keep running now, but I always look over my shoulder, because the Faceless Man doesn't age, and he doesn't sleep, and he never ever stops looking. Okay, the last one is called "I was sent a video of something I thought I dreamed as a child." This is a story that I've never shared with anyone, and to be honest, I'm scared shitless to tell it. All I ask is for you to please be understanding. I know what I did was stupid and dangerous, and I could have gotten myself killed. I get it. I didn't die, but I think something even worse might have happened. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that the internet can be a profoundly creepy and fucked up place, but when I was growing up, it was still a relatively novel experience. My mum discovered that if she handed me her shiny new iPad, I would immediately stop blabbering about whatever grade 3 drama was going on in my head, and instead would sit silently, perfectly entertained, for hours and hours on end. I was probably one of the first iPad kids, something I feel pretty gross about looking back. After a few months of mainlining every YouTube video I could find, I decided I was going to make my own channel in the hopes of becoming one of the proto-YouTube stars that had just started being a thing. As you can probably imagine, my content was shit. I recorded dozens and dozens of short movies with my stuffed animals and plastic horses, making up stories and doing all of their voices, filming with the iPad's built-in camera in glorious 720p. Think barely comprehensible storylines delivered by a girl who very clearly needed a speech therapist. Most of my videos had exactly 1 view on them, or 2 if I showed my mum. Thinking back on it, I don't think she realised I was actually sharing stuff publicly on the internet, because she never responded with anything more than mild amusement. One of my favourite toys was my Cheer Bear stuffy. It's the pink Care Bear you've probably seen if you ever watched the cartoons. Her whole personality is being cheerful, so naturally I'd cast her as the tortured hero who is orphaned, or kidnapped, or left for dead, or whatever wildly dramatic situation my weird little brain could dream up. I started to notice that the videos I made with Cheer Bear were getting more views than the others. Nothing crazy, but like 5 or 6, huge numbers to me. I'd tirelessly been putting out these 1-view epics for the better part of the school year, so I was really happy to see other people might be watching. Then one night, everything changed. I got my very first subscriber. The user was named Cheer Bear 2007 and had a cute pink hand-drawn bear as the icon. She'd liked a lot of my videos and even added them to her own playlist, Cheer Bear Adventures adventures, which seemed like a collection of videos made by other kids around my age. She'd leave these cute little comments for me, mostly just silly stuff, her saying that she remembered when the stuff in the video happened to her, and how I was so good at making movies. It sounds pathetic, but reading all the stuff she was saying felt like the first ray of sun I'd felt on my skin for months. When I talked to my mum about anything I cared about, she was nice enough, but even as a kid, I could feel that her attention really wasn't mine. She was perfectly happy to stick me in front of a screen and live her own life. She talked to me before about why it was so important to learn to be self-sufficient, and I guess that included being able to make new friends, especially one who seemed just as excited about the things that made me excited. I started writing to Cheer Bear daily, exchanging messages in the comment section of my videos. At first she suggested some new story ideas, then asked me about what other cartoons I like, if I had any siblings, pretty normal stuff. I mentioned at some point that it was getting cold where I lived, and she wanted to know where that was. I told her the name of the city that I lived in, and wouldn't you know, she lived nearby, less than an hour in fact, and knowing that, she wondered would I be interested in having my very own private meet and greet with the real Cheer Bear. I know, again I asked if you're understanding. I was almost 9 then, and my mum had recently started letting me try out a limited test run as a latchkey kid. I was allowed to walk home after school, let myself in, make myself a snack. She made it very clear I wasn't allowed to use knives or turn on the oven, and keep myself entertained until she made it home from the office. I wish I could say that I'd gone to my mum and told her about the cool new friend I'd made, and that she wanted to visit me in real life. Instead, I carefully wrote my address into the comments of my video and added that my mum usually didn't get home till 5. Have you ever noticed that nervousness and excitement are kind of the same feeling? The day Cheer Bear was supposed to visit me, I was barely able to sit still at my desk at school. I was so proud, like I had a secret that the other kids weren't worthy of knowing. I could barely wait until the bell rang. I ran the 5 blocks home and let myself in. Barely a minute later, I heard a knock at the door. I want to assure you that nothing overly bad happened to me that day, and I mean it, as bizarre as that sounds. I opened the door, and there she was, Cheer Bear, her pink fluffy shape so big she had to turn sideways to fit through the door. She brought 2 things with her, a boombox tucked under one arm, and a stuffed brown bear under the other. The second she came inside, I couldn't stop talking, asking her questions, telling her how happy I was to see her. She guided me towards the centre of the room, motioning for me to stay there. I watched her, my entire body shaking with excitement. She placed the teddy on the shelf in front of us, and the stereo on the ground. For the briefest moment, she turned her back to me, and I saw her pulling off her gloves so she could click the play button. I remember thinking it was strange, the amount of hair she had on her arms. The music began to play. I remember overhearing a kid in my class bragging about how she met Mickey at Disneyland when she went that past summer. It was just a few moments with him, a quick wave, but she'd be riding that high for weeks later. What happened with Cheer Bear was a lot more than that. The CD started with the theme song for the Care Bear cartoon, and she started to dance. She had motion for every lyric, spinning and gesturing with her arms. As the end of the song faded, she pulled me into a tight embrace. A second later, a new song began, something else from the cartoon, and she started a new round of choreography to the next track. It became a loop, a new song, a hug, a new song, a hug, over and over and over. She moved around the room faster, the energy behind her gestures almost manic. I remember dancing with her, trying to follow her speed, breathlessly falling into her arms during each hug. She was bigger than me, bigger than Mum even, with soft fur that smelled like wet earth. After what felt like ages, the last notes of the song faded out and the music finally stopped. Cheer Bear took both my hands in her own, and for a moment we stood there, looking into each other's eyes. Although she hadn't said a single word since she arrived, I could hear the muffled sounds inside the suit, pants of exertion. She then guided me to face forward towards the little teddy bear on the shelf, and together we bowed deeply. The visit was over. She sat me down on the couch, gathered her stereo and teddy bear, and let herself out the front door, fitting through the frame with only a little difficulty. As soon as she closed the door, I ran to the window to see her, but she was already gone. Mum didn't believe me, and I don't blame her. It sounds insane, even just to write it now. A life-size version of my favourite stuffed animal showed up, danced with me for an afternoon, and left. At least I had enough sense not to brag about it at school. Even then I knew how unbelievable it was. Something about that day changed me though. I felt like I'd be blessed somehow, chosen for greatness like the characters in the videos I was as if overnight I had developed a sense of confidence I'd never had before. I begged my mum to sign me up for dance lessons, thinking maybe I could be even better if Cheer Bear ever came back. I stopped hiding in the bathroom stall during lunch and tried talking to other kids in my class. I was never popular, but I did find some other weirdos at school who was excited about the same stuff I was, and we started chatting endlessly on MSN Messenger after class. I slowly stopped making videos on my YouTube channel. For the first time in my life, I had friends to spend time with. I wasn't lonely anymore. By the time the holidays rolled around, the time I'd spent with Cheer Bear seemed more like a dream than reality. I'm sure I would have convinced myself it didn't happen, if not for something that happened the week before Christmas. I just walked home from school when I saw something shiny and pink on the front step, a wrapped present addressed to me. I opened it, and to my absolute delight, I found a little teddy bear exactly like the one Cheer Bear had brought with her when we met. Up until tonight, that was the end of my story. This year, I started my first year of college, and I'm living in the dorms. Tonight, I was spending an uneventful Saturday night alone studying for finals when an email popped up in my inbox. Unknown sender. The message was brief. Is this you? I must be just as stupid as when I was a kid because I clicked the link. It took me to an unlisted YouTube video, 30 minutes long. It started with a black screen. I pushed play. The Care Bear theme song came in first. Care Bear's countdown. 4, 3, 2, 1. I felt my breath catch in my chest. The song ended, and on the screen I saw myself as a child, falling into the arms of a stranger dressed as Cheer Bear. I watched the entire video. The quality was terrible, almost a fisheye lens, and as Cheer Bear began to dance more erratically, she would frequently step out of the frame. But I was there on screen the whole time, looking awkward and clumsy and shy as I tried to dance along. There were some things I saw in that video I didn't remember at all. For one, the fur was sort of matted and in different areas of the suit. A large dark patch under the arms, and right under the neck where the head connected. The size was also alarming. Whoever was in that suit must have been over 6 feet tall. The costume almost seemed too small, and at times I could see a gap of skin between where the gloves and the sleeves connected. And finally, in the last moment, when Cheer Bear knelt over to pick the camera up, I swear I could see a glint of human eyes through the mesh, wide and white with a pinprick pupil. It's been 3 hours since I received that email, and I honestly don't know what to do, and there's something I can't stop thinking about. Cheer Bear never had a camera with her when she came into my house. She only had that little brown teddy. The same teddy I got for Christmas that year. The same teddy I'd kept in my bedroom every day after. The same teddy that's currently sitting on my nightstand in my dorm. I'm honestly not sure if I should email this person back, or what will happen if I do. Yes, I'm in that video, but who the fuck is in it with me? That's terrifying. And the mental image of watching that video and seeing the eyes in the mesh as they described, it's enough to send chills down your spine. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed these stories, and if you did, make sure you go and upvote them on Reddit. The link should be in the description as always. And I'll see you tomorrow for some more anticipatory stories and